There is a town in the middle of the Australian desert where most of the houses are underground. You will not see them from the road. You will see a few chimneys, a few doors built into low hills, a sign now and then. But the homes, the churches, the shops, the bedrooms where children sleep, all of that is below the surface. The official reason is heat. It gets so hot in that part of the country that living on top of the ground is simply not practical. So the people, the story goes, dug down. They dug down so far and so thoroughly that the town now exists more as a hollow than as a place. And that is the version everyone agrees on. That is the version on the maps and in the tourist brochures and in the documentaries. But if you talk to the people who live there, and if you talk to the people who have spent their whole lives crawling through the holes in the country around them, you start to hear something else. You start to hear that the tunnels do not stop at the edge of town. You start to hear that there are passages out in the desert that the maps do not show, that nobody officially dug, that nobody can quite explain the age of. You start to hear that some of them go further than anyone has been willing to follow. And you start to hear very quietly that some of them seem to connect. That if you laid all the known cave systems and old mine workings and dry riverbeds and limestone voids of the Australian Outback on top of each other, you would not get a random mess. You would get something that looks almost like a plan. Something that looks almost like a network. Something that some point in some forgotten age seems to have already mapped, and then walked away from and left the desert to grow over the entrances, one by one until the country forgot they were even there. Tonight, we are going to walk that network. We are going to look at the holes in Australia that the official story explains. And then we are going to look at the parts of those holes that the official story does not explain. And we are going to ask the question, very gently, very slowly. What if the tunnels beneath the outback are not separate? What if they were always connected? And what if the thing they connect to is something nobody has ever properly put on a map? Before we go any further down into the dark, take a moment to settle in. If you are listening to this in bed, let your head sink into the pillow. If you are listening to this in a chair, let your shoulders drop. There is no rush tonight. We will be moving slowly the way you would move through a real cave, with a torch in one hand and the other hand on the wall, feeling for the next turn. If you find these long, quiet walks through forgotten places useful, if they help you slow down at the end of the day, you can hit subscribe and tap the little bell beside it. That way, the next time we go somewhere strange and slow, you'll be told about it without having to look. You can drift off knowing the next walk is already waiting. And if you ever come back to a story halfway through because you fell asleep before the end, that is fine. That is what these are made for. The dark is patient. The tunnels will still be here. Now, with that out of the way, let us go down. There are 19 places we are going to visit tonight. 19 openings in the Australian ground. Some of them are famous. Some of them are barely known outside the small group of people who study them. Some of them are tourist sites with handrails and lights and souvenir shops at the entrance. Others are wild, raw holes in the desert where the only sound is your own breathing coming back at you off the wall. We will visit them one at a time. We will take our time at each one. We will look at what the textbooks say about them. And then we will look at what the surface of the rock itself seems to be saying. And then we will look at what the oldest people in the country were saying about them, long before any geologist ever wrote a paper. And by the end, we will try to lay them out together, and we will ask the question one more time. Do these places connect? And if they do, what are they connecting to? Number 1, Coober Pedy. We start in the middle of South Australia, in a stretch of country so flat and so dry that from the air it looks more like the surface of another planet than a part of the continent. The colour of the ground is a pale, dusty orange. The horizon is so far away that it bends. There are no trees worth speaking of. There is a road that comes in from the south, and a road that goes out to the north. And where they meet there is a town, or at least there is a sign that says there is a town. The town itself is mostly invisible. The first thing the textbook will tell you about Coober Pedy is that it is an opal mining town. That is true. It produces more opal than anywhere else in the world by a wide margin. The second thing the textbook will tell you is that the people there live underground. Because of the heat, that is also true. The summer temperatures on the surface can climb past 45 degrees Celsius for weeks at a time. And even a thin layer of earth between you and the sun makes a difference of 15 or 20 degrees. So the people dug homes into the soft sandstone. Long corridors with rooms branching off either side. Bedrooms with no windows, just a vent shaft going up to the surface. Kitchens cut out of the stone. Churches carved into the hillsides with arched ceilings and pews chiseled into the rock. All of that is well documented. All of that you can visit. You can pay a small fee and sleep in an underground motel and order a meal in an underground restaurant and have a beer in an underground pub. And the only way you will know you are below the ground at all is that the air is very still and very cool. And there is no sound from the outside. But here is the part that the brochures do not dwell on. The houses are not the only tunnels. There are mining tunnels. There are old mining tunnels. There are very old mining tunnels. And the old mining tunnels run for hundreds of kilometers in a roughly tangled mess underneath and around the town. And nobody has fully mapped them. They are dangerous. They were dug by individual miners over more than a century, with no central plan and no obligation to record what they were doing. People still occasionally fall into them. Cars have fallen into them. Houses have on occasion started slowly subsiding into them. The official position is that this is simply what happens when you let thousands of small operators dig wherever they like for over 100 years. That is a reasonable position. But the people who have spent their whole lives in those tunnels will sometimes tell you, if you ask the right way, that some of the passages they have walked do not look like they were dug 100 years ago. They look older. The walls are smoother than a pick would leave them. The bends are too clean. The intersections sometimes meet at angles that nobody planning an opal mine would have any reason to use. And every so often, a miner will follow a passage out under the desert and find that it just keeps going. Not towards anywhere. Not towards opal. Just going. As if someone had started cutting a line in the rock for a reason that had nothing to do with looking for stones. And then one day stopped. Some of those passages have been blocked off for safety, for legal reasons. For reasons the locals do not really discuss in front of strangers. Some have not. The town sleeps on top of all of it. And every now and then, in the deep middle of a hot afternoon, when the streets above are empty and the surface is too bright to look at, you can sit in one of the cool, dark rooms below the ground and listen. And the silence has a particular quality. The silence of a place where the air has been still for longer than the people on the surface have been awake, possibly much longer. Number 2, Cocklebiddy Cave. We move west from Coober Pedy, across the open desert, across the line where South Australia becomes Western Australia, and out onto the Nullarbor. The Nullarbor is the largest single piece of limestone on Earth. It is roughly the size of a small country. It is so flat that the train line that crosses it has the longest straight stretch of track anywhere in the world. Almost 500 kilometers without a single bend. Above the surface, there is almost nothing. A few low bushes, a few salt pans. The occasional wedge-tailed eagle drifting at a height where the heat haze makes it look like it is swimming through the sky rather than flying. But below the surface, the Nullarbor is something else entirely. Below the surface, the Nullarbor is a labyrinth. The limestone has been slowly dissolving from below for millions of years. And what has been left behind is a system of caves and tunnels and underground rivers that even the people who study them admit they have only barely begun to chart. The most famous of those caves is Cocklebiddy. From the surface, Cocklebiddy looks like nothing. It looks like a slight dip in the otherwise featureless plain, with a small opening at the bottom that you could almost step over without noticing. You climb down into that opening, and the first chamber is dry and dusty and feels like a normal cave. Then you keep going, and the floor drops, and the air gets colder, and eventually you come to water. Not a puddle, not a small pool, a flooded passage. And that flooded passage, when divers first started exploring it seriously in the 1980s and 1990s, turned out to be one of the longest underwater caves anywhere on the planet. They have followed it for more than 6,000 meters. They have not reached the end of it. They keep finding new branches. They keep finding new chambers. They keep finding side passages that nobody had been into before. The official geological explanation is straightforward. The limestone was once an ancient seabed. As the climate changed and the sea retreated, fresh water began moving through the rock, dissolving it slowly, hollowing it out. Over millions of years, you get a cave. Over more millions of years, you get a system of caves. That explanation works. The problem is that it does not explain everything. It does not explain why some of the passages, when you look at the walls carefully, appear to have markings on them that do not match the patterns water leaves when it carves through stone. It does not explain why certain bends in certain tunnels seem to angle towards each other in ways that water flow does not particularly favor. It does not explain why, when the surveyors started laying the known sections of Cocklebiddy on a map, the overall shape of the system began to look less like a randomly branching river and more like a deliberate route, a route from somewhere to somewhere else. And it does not explain at all why some of the deepest divers have, very quietly, reported what feels like cool moving air coming from passages that, on paper, are supposed to be entirely flooded and entirely sealed. Air should not move through a sealed system. Air moves through systems that have other openings somewhere, somewhere out under the desert. The desert above stays silent. The sun bleaches the rocks. The eagles drift. And somewhere below their shadows, the cave keeps going. Number 3. Cunalda Cave. Not far from Cocklebiddy, still on the Nullarbor, still under the same vast slab of limestone. There is a cave that does not get talked about as often, because what is in it is so old and so quiet and so important that the people who care about it would rather it stayed mostly out of the news. Cunalda Cave. The entrance is again almost nothing from the surface. A collapsed dough-line, a kind of sinkhole with a steep slope of broken rock leading down into the dark. You climb down. The first chamber opens up. The second chamber opens up. You keep going. And eventually, deep inside, far beyond the reach of any natural light, the walls change. The walls have marks on them. They are not paintings. They are not carvings in the usual sense. They are lines. Long, soft, deliberate lines, drawn with fingers into the soft surface of the limestone wall, when the rock was wet enough to take the impression. There are thousands of them. They overlap, they cross, they run in patterns that look almost like waves, or almost like writing, or almost like a kind of language nobody has been able to read. They are old. They are very old. The conservative estimate is around 20,000 years. The older estimates push that figure back further still, towards 30,000. Whoever made those marks was inside that cave, in the absolute darkness, deep underground, by torchlight, leaving careful patterns on the walls when most of Europe was still under ice. The official archaeological view is that these are some of the oldest examples of human artistic expression anywhere on Earth. That view is correct, but it stops there. It treats Cunalda as a single site, a single cave, a single chamber, a single mystery. The people who have studied the cave for longer, and the traditional owners whose ancestors made some of those marks, will tell you that Cunalda is not a single anything. Cunalda is one node. Cunalda sits on a network. The Murning people, whose country includes that part of the Nullarbor, have stories about a serpent that moves through the rock beneath the plain. The serpent has tunnels. The tunnels go to other places. Some of those places are other caves. Some of those places are no longer accessible. Some of those places are out under the sea, on what used to be dry land when the sea was lower, before the last great rising of the water. The serpent stories are not just metaphor. They are maps. They are memory maps. They describe a path. And when you take that path and you put it on top of the modern geological survey, the line of the serpent and the line of the cave system are not in different places. They are in the same place. The textbook calls it limestone karst formation. The Murning call it the path of the serpent. They are describing the same tunnels, They are simply describing them in different languages, from different sides of the same dark wall. Kuni Nalda is where you can sometimes still hear the wall. The marks on the limestone are silent, but they are not random. They are pointing. And what they are pointing at, the official story has not yet learned to name. Number 4. Murawijini Caves. A little east of Cunalda, still on the Nullarbor, the same limestone, the same sky, the same enormous quiet. The Murawijini Caves. The name itself, in the language of the people who walked that country long before there were any roads on it, means something close to bloody hands. The reason for that name is on the cave walls. Inside the chambers, on the soft limestone, there are handprints. Red handprints, made by pressing a hand against the wall and either applying ochre directly or by holding ochre in the mouth and blowing it across the back of the hand to leave a sharp outline on the rock. The handprints are not the only marks. There are other shapes, other patterns, but the hands are what stay with you because there are so many of them and because they are at different heights and because the heights tell you something. The smallest hands are at the lower levels. The largest hands are higher up. Children and adults, whole families, whole generations leaving their hands on the same wall over a span of time that the carbon dating cannot quite settle on. But that has to be measured in thousands of years rather than hundreds. The textbook will tell you that these are ceremonial markings. That is true. The textbook will tell you that the cave was a sacred place. That is also true. What the textbook does not always tell you is what was happening in the rest of the cave system at the time those hands were being pressed against the wall. Because Murawijini is not a single chamber. Murawijini is 3 caves sitting close together, all opening into the same general formation underground, all part of the same wider Nullarbor system that connects through passages large and small, and sometimes too narrow, to follow, to Cunalda, to Cocklebiddy, and to dozens of other caves that have not been formally named yet, because the people surveying them have not finished counting. The hands on the wall at Murawijini are not just decoration. They are not just art. They are, in the way the old people would say it, a record of presence. They are saying, we were here, we were here, we were here. And the careful way they are placed, in a chamber that connects through tunnels to other chambers under other parts of the country, raises a question that the textbook does not usually like to ask. Why would people over thousands of years keep returning to the same underground place, deep below the surface, to leave the marks of their hands? People did not live in those caves. They lived above. They came down for a reason. Something about that place. Something about that point in the network. Something that mattered enough that families brought their children down into the cold and the dark and pressed their small hands against the wall and made the gesture that says we were here. The desert above does not remember them. The wind does not remember them. The limestone does. The handprints are still there. The cave is still cold. And somewhere, through a passage that nobody has properly traced yet, the same network continues all the way under the plain. Number 5, Jenolan Caves. We leave the Nullarbor now. We travel east, all the way across the country, into the Blue Mountains region of New South Wales, into a deep valley folded between high sandstone ridges, the Jenolan Caves. If you have grown up in Australia, there is a reasonable chance you visited them on a school excursion. They are one of the most popular show caves in the country. There are lights inside. There are walkways. There are tour guides. There are gift shops at the entrance. It is all very civilized, and it would be easy, looking at the gift shops, to forget what those caves actually are. They are the oldest open cave system in the world. Not the oldest in Australia. The oldest anywhere on Earth. The dating that geologists settled on, after a long period of careful argument, put the formation of those caves at around 340 million years ago. To give you a sense of how much time that is roughly 100 million years older than the dinosaurs. The caves at Jenolan were already old when the dinosaurs first appeared. They were already very old when the dinosaurs disappeared. They have been quietly opening and closing and rearranging themselves for longer than most of the major mountain ranges on the planet have existed. They are older than the Himalayas. They are older than the Rocky Mountains. They are older than the rocks at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. The textbook explanation for them is again water. Fresh water moving through ancient limestone, dissolving it, leaving voids behind. That is, as far as it goes, true. But it explains the formation of the chambers. It does not explain everything. It does not explain, for example, why the cave system, when you map the surveyed sections, has a strange property. There are corridors in Jenolan that run in straight lines for surprising distances. Long, almost level corridors that connect chamber to chamber that do not particularly follow the path you would expect water to take. Water tends to wander. Water tends to take the easiest path through the softest stone. Water does not usually punch a long straight line through a limestone ridge. The Wiradjuri people, whose country includes that area, have their own stories about Jenolan. They have stories about a being who passed through the rock there, who left their shape inside the stone. They have stories about the caves being part of something that runs underneath the mountains. And here is where it gets interesting. The Wiradjuri stories do not describe Jenolan as the end of anything. They describe Jenolan as a way through to somewhere else, a way through to other caves, to other openings, to places further west, perhaps as far west as the dry interior. The official survey of Jenolan is not finished. There are passages that have been blocked by collapse. There are passages that are too narrow to enter. There are passages where the air, when measured carefully by the cavers who go in with proper instruments, moves in a way that suggests it is connected to a much larger volume of cave somewhere out of sight. Air does that when there is somewhere for it to come from. Air does that when the system is not closed. The system at Jenolan, by every honest measure, is not closed. And whatever it is connected to on the other side of those collapses, in the parts that nobody has been able to reach yet, has been there for 340 million years. Quiet, patient, waiting. The tourists walk through the lit sections in the afternoon and take photographs and buy souvenirs at the gift shop and drive home. The cave keeps going. Number 6, Wellington Caves. A little to the west of Jenolan, on the western slopes of the Great Dividing Range, in country that is now mostly given over to farming and sheep, there is a small town called Wellington. And just outside that small town, in a low limestone ridge, there are the Wellington Caves. They are not as famous as Jenolan. They do not have the same gloss of tourist infrastructure. There are tours, there are lights in the main chambers, but the operation is quieter, more modest, more local. And what the Wellington Caves are famous for, in the part of the scientific world that pays attention to such things, is not the rooms themselves. It is what was found inside them, the bones. The Wellington Caves are one of the most important fossil sites in Australia, and they are important specifically because of the megafauna. The giant kangaroos, the Diprotodon, which was the largest marsupial that ever lived, roughly the size of a hippopotamus. The marsupial lion, the giant wombats, the long-necked browsing creatures that wandered the country before the people who tell the modern stories about Australia had even arrived. Those animals all left bones in the Wellington Caves. Some of them died there. Some of them were carried there by water. Some of them, the researchers think, were brought there by other animals. Or, in some cases, possibly by the first people. The bones built up in layers on the floors of the chambers, sealed under flowstone, preserved for tens of thousands of years, and in some cases hundreds of thousands. The textbook treats this as a happy accident. The caves happen to be in a good location. Animals happen to fall into them, or be carried into them, or be eaten in them. Over time, the deposits built up, and there is no particular reason to argue with it for most of the material that was recovered. But the locals and the older accounts from the 19th century, when the caves were first being explored by people who wrote things down, tell a slightly different version. They tell of passages at the back of the main chambers that nobody had gone down properly. They tell of side galleries that the early surveyors had marked on their plans, and that in some cases had been quietly closed off in the years that followed, for reasons of safety, for reasons of preservation. for reasons that were not always entirely clearly explained. And they tell of a feature of the deeper sections of the caves that is genuinely strange. The Wellington Caves in some of the unmapped passages have a quality of air movement that, again, is not consistent with the system being closed at the back. Cool air comes from somewhere. Damp air goes somewhere. The system is breathing. And a system that breathes is connected to something. The Wiradjuri stories around Wellington, similar to the stories around Jenolan, describe the caves as part of a path that goes under the country, a path that connects to other holes, in other ridges, in other parts of the land. The textbook calls Wellington a fossil site. The old stories call it a stop along a road below the surface, a road with other stops. Some of those stops have been found, some of them have not. The town of Wellington above goes about its business. The cattle graze. The sun rises over the limestone ridge. And somewhere down below, in passages that have not been on a map for at least 100 years, the air moves gently from somewhere to somewhere else. Number 7, Yarrangobilly Caves. South of Wellington, well south, down in the high country of New South Wales, in the rugged folded mountains that mark the headwaters of the Great Murray River system, there are the Yarrangobilly Caves. They sit in a deep limestone gorge at an elevation high enough that snow falls there in winter. The country around them is harsh. It is a country of granite and basalt, of cold rivers, of eucalyptus forest growing on slopes too steep for sheep. And in the middle of that, in a narrow band of much older limestone, there are the caves. Yarrangobilly has several main caves open to the public. Each one has its own character. Each one has its own particular set of formations. One has a long flooded passage with a thermal pool nearby, a pool of warm water that bubbles up out of the ground in the middle of country that is otherwise very cold for most of the year. Another has chambers with formations so delicate they look like spun glass. Another has rooms so vast that voices echo in them for many seconds before fading. The textbook treats Yarrangobilly the same way it treats most Australian caves. Limestone cast, slowly dissolved by acidic groundwater over millions of years. Beautiful. Geologically significant. A place to bring schoolchildren and tourists. All true. But there is a feature of Yarrangobilly that does not get much attention in the brochures. And it is this, the thermal pool. The pool of warm water that comes up out of the ground beside the cave system. The water in that pool is by any reasonable measure warmer than it should be. The country around it is cold. The rocks around it are cold. The general groundwater of the region is cold. But the water that emerges at the pool is consistently warm year-round, summer and winter, regardless of what is happening on the surface above. The textbook explanation is that the water has come from a long way down. It has descended deep into the rock, picked up heat from the natural warmth of the deep earth, and then risen back up through a different set of passages, emerging at the surface still warm. That is a reasonable explanation. It is also the kind of explanation that opens a door rather than closing one, because for the water to be doing that, there has to be a system, there has to be a route. There has to be a network of passages going down, through the rock, perhaps for kilometers, and then bending and coming back up. And that network, whatever it looks like, is unmapped. It has to be. Nobody's been down there. Nobody can go down there. The passages are flooded. The pressures are wrong. The temperatures, by the time you get deep enough to matter, would not allow human exploration. So we know there is a system. We know it must connect downwards to somewhere very deep. And we know that the small section we can see at Yarrangobilly, the pretty cave with the tourists and the handrails, is the visible tip of something that, by physics alone, has to be enormous. The Ngarigo people, whose country includes the high country around Yarrangobilly, have stories about the warm water. They have stories about what lives in the deep places. They have stories about how the water that comes up at Yarrangobilly, and how the breath comes from a place that runs all the way under the mountains. The geologist would call the same thing a deep hydrothermal flow. The old stories call it a path. Both can be true at the same time. The cave at Yarrangobilly is small. What is underneath it is not. And nobody to this day has put what is underneath it on any map that anybody is willing to publish. Number 8. Wombian Caves, not far from Yaranga Billy, in a different fold of the same long mountain country, sitting in a valley that is harder to reach than the main highways. There is another set of caves, the Wombian Caves. They are smaller in scale than Jenolan and quieter in mood. They are also in some ways stranger. The limestone at Wombian is white, not the pale grey of most cave limestone. White. The kind of clean, hard, polished white that you see in marble. And that is, in fact, what most of the rock around Wombian is. It is marble. Limestone that has been put under enough heat and pressure, over enough geological time, that its structure has changed. The chambers in the Wombian Caves are therefore not normal limestone chambers. They are chambers in marble, and marble does not behave like limestone. It does not dissolve as easily. It does not form the same gentle flowing shapes. When you do get a cave system in marble, the shapes you get are sharper, harder, more angular. The chambers feel less like the inside of a bone and more like the inside of a building. There are places in Wombian where you can stand in a chamber and look at the walls and the ceiling, and the geometry of it does not look entirely natural to your eye. The angles are too clean. The lines are too straight. The transitions between one surface and another are too sharp. The geologist will tell you that this is what marble caves can do. Marble breaks along its planes of stress. Marble forms chambers that look more constructed than carved, because the stone itself has structure. That explanation is sound. It is also a little too neat, because the Wombian system, when you start exploring its further reaches, includes passages where the white marble has not been smoothed and rounded in the way you would expect from millions of years of water flow. There are corridors where the surface of the rock retains tool-like marks in patterns that nobody has been able to convincingly attribute to either natural processes or modern human exploration. The old stories of the Gundungura people, whose country includes that area, speak of a being who shaped the rock in that valley. The being is sometimes described as carrying a kind of light. The being is sometimes described as carrying a kind of fire. The being moved through the rock the way a person walks through air. The marble of Wombian, in those stories, is what was left behind. It is not the country itself. It is the path of the being who moved through the country, leaving the rock changed in their wake. The textbook will not endorse that account. The textbook will speak instead of regional metamorphism and tectonic compression and burial heating. Both descriptions, again, refer to the same rock. They simply name it differently. And in the deeper sections of Wombian, where the tour does not go, and where only the cavers with permits and proper equipment are allowed to enter, the system continues into corridors of white stone that do not feel like they end anywhere natural. They feel like they keep going. They feel like they connect. The town nearby is small. The road in is slow. The caves keep their own time. Number 9, Abercrombie Caves. Travel further west again, into the rolling sheep country of central New South Wales. And you come to another small show cave, the Abercrombie Caves. They are easy to miss. The road in is unsealed for the last part of the journey. The visitor centre is modest. The accommodation is basic. The reason most people come here, if they come here at all, is for one of the most extraordinary natural features in the country, which is the Grand Arch. The Grand Arch is the largest natural archway in the Southern Hemisphere. It is a single vast tunnel of stone, large enough that you could drive a substantial number of vehicles through it side by side, and still have room left over. It is over 200 meters long. It is high enough at the center that a multi-story building could fit underneath without scraping the ceiling. It is by any measure a remarkable piece of geology. The textbook says that it formed when an ancient river flowed through that part of the country, cutting and dissolving its way through a band of limestone over millions of years, and the tunnel was left high and dry. That is the standard explanation. It is plausible. It is also slightly strange when you stand inside the Grand Arch and look at it carefully, because the scale of it is hard to square with what a river would normally do. Rivers do cut through limestone. Rivers do make tunnels. But rivers tend to make tunnels that are roughly proportional to the river that made them. The river that supposedly carved the Grand Arch would have been a very, very large river indeed. Larger than anything that currently flows in that part of the country. larger than anything the climate of that area, even in much wetter periods of its past, would obviously have supported. Some of the older accounts, written by people who saw the arch in the 19th century, before it was a tourist site, describe it differently. They describe it not as the remnant of a river tunnel, but as a kind of corridor. They use the word corridor. They describe walking through it as a thing you do, the way you might walk through a building. They describe the walls as having an oddly worked appearance in places. They describe finding side passages off the main arch that led further into the rock, some of which have since been closed for safety. The Wiradjuri stories about the Grand Arch describe it as a doorway through which something used to pass. The something is sometimes described as an ancestor, sometimes as a serpent, sometimes simply as a presence. The arch is what is left of its path. The smaller caves around it, of which there are many, are described in those same stories as the side rooms of the same structure, not natural caves, side rooms. The textbook will not use the word side rooms. The textbook will speak of subsidiary passages and lateral cave development. The vocabulary is different. The underlying claim is the same. There are passages off the main arch. They go somewhere. Nobody has finished mapping them. Some of them are sealed. Some of them are simply not on any current survey. The country above is quiet sheep country. The Grand Arch sits in the bottom of its valley, casting its enormous shadow, and the wind, when it blows the right way, passes through it with a low and distant sound, as if the building it once was had not entirely forgotten how to speak. Number 10. Buchan Caves. We cross now into the state of Victoria, into the far eastern corner of it, into the rolling green country of East Gippsland, where the climate is wetter and the forest is thicker, and the limestone, when you find it, is buried under a much deeper layer of vegetation than it is in the drier states. The Buchan Caves. The setting is gentle, the valleys are soft. The river nearby runs clear over stones. There are picnic grounds and walking tracks and a quiet caravan park. The caves themselves are in a low ridge above the river. The two main ones open to the public, Royal Cave and Fairy Cave, are richly decorated with formations. Stalactites the size of a person. Stalagmites the size of a small tree. Curtains of stone hanging from the ceiling. Pools of still water in the lower chambers that reflect the light so cleanly. You cannot always tell where the surface is. Buchan is, by any measure, one of the prettier cave systems in Australia. It is also one of the more honestly old ones. The dating on some of the formations there suggests that water has been moving slowly through that rock for several million years, layering the minerals out drop by drop. That in itself is not unusual for limestone country. What is unusual about Buchan is the network. The Royal and Fairy Caves are the famous ones, but they are only the visible part of the system. The whole ridge is hollow. There are dozens of other openings in it. Some of them are small, some of them are tight. Some of them are big enough to walk into, and big enough to get genuinely lost in. The full survey of the Buchan system has been ongoing for over a century, and the cavers who work it will tell you if you ask them that the survey is not finished, not even close to finished. There are passages that have been identified but not measured. There are passages that have been measured but not mapped to a publishable standard. There are passages that the surveyors have walked into and decided to leave alone because they go too far, or they go in a direction that the cavers do not have time to follow, or they go down past the water table and would require specialist diving equipment that the average team does not carry. The Gunai people, whose country includes that part of Victoria, have stories about the caves at Buchan. They have stories about the river that runs above them, and they have stories about what runs below the river. They speak of a long underground waterway that does not stay in the visible riverbed. They speak of water that goes into the rock and comes out somewhere a long way away. They speak of a creature, sometimes described as an eel, sometimes described as something older than an eel, that moves through that long underground waterway and that knows the whole shape of it, end to end. The geologists would call that long underground waterway a karst conduit network. The Gunai would call it the path of the creature. The two descriptions again refer to the same thing. The conduit network exists. It has been confirmed by dye tracing studies. where dye injected into the water in one part of the system has been detected coming out at the surface kilometers away. In places that the surface map would not have predicted, the water knows the route. The creature, in the older language, knows the route. The textbook is finally beginning to catch up. The forest above remains soft and green. The river still runs clear over its stones. The cave in all its larger and quieter sections breathes on. Number 11. Narracourt Caves. We move west again, into South Australia, into the green pastoral country of the lower southeast, into a part of the world where the soil is rich and the rain is more reliable than it is anywhere else on that side of the country. The Narracourt Caves. They are a World Heritage Site. That status is not given out lightly. The reason Narracourt holds it is the same reason Wellington Caves are important, multiplied many times over. The bones. Narracourt is one of the richest fossil sites for ancient Australian megafauna anywhere on the continent. The caves there acted, for hundreds of thousands of years, as pitfall traps. Animals would wander across the surface, step into a small opening in the ground, fall into a chamber below, and never get out again. Over time, the bones built up, generation upon generation, species upon species, creatures that no living human has ever seen, layered in the dust at the bottoms of the chambers, perfectly preserved by the dry, still air of the limestone underground. The list of what has been found at Narracourt reads like a guidebook to a lost continent. The marsupial lion with its strange blade-like teeth and its powerful forelimbs, a predator unlike anything alive today. The giant short-faced kangaroo, taller than a man at the shoulder, with a face flattened almost like the face of a horse. The diprotodon, again, the largest marsupial that ever lived. The giant wombat, large enough that the entrance to its burrow would have been the size of the mouth of a modern cave itself. The Thylacoleo, the Procoptodon, the Zygomaturus, the list keeps going. The scientific value of Narracourt is, quite simply, beyond ordinary measure. It is one of the most important windows we have into the deep biological past of this continent. But the value of Narracourt is one thing. The structure of Narracourt is another, and the structure is where the questions begin. The cave system at Narracourt is large. It is much larger than the parts that are open to the public. Much larger, even than the parts that have been formally surveyed. There are passages going off the known chambers in many directions, some of them too tight to enter. Some of them blocked by collapse, some of them simply unexplored because the priority has always been the fossil work in the main rooms. The cavers who have spent the most time in the Narracourt system will tell you, again, with a kind of patient reluctance to overstate the point, that the system feels much larger than the maps show. They will tell you that they have followed passages out under the surrounding pasture, and that those passages keep going. They will tell you that there are places in the system where you can stand still and listen, and you can hear the sound of moving water at a great distance. Water moving through stone, somewhere out under the country, on a path the surface mapping has not yet caught. The Boandic people, whose country includes the Narracourt area, have their own accounts of the caves. They describe the country there as a country with two layers. The visible layer, where the trees grow, and the kangaroos move, and the people walk, and the lower layer, where another version of the country continues. A version with its own paths and its own waters and its own creatures. The two layers in the Boandic stories are not entirely separate. There are places where one bleeds into the other. The caves at Narracourt are described as some of those places. They are not just holes in the ground, they are doors. They are doors into the version of the country that lives underneath the version on top. The pitfall traps that captured the megafauna are described, in some of the older versions of the stories, as the wrong kind of door, as the doors that you do not want to fall through. The textbook will speak of natural traps. The old stories will speak of misplaced openings, of doors that should have been closed, of paths that ran where they should not have run. The result is the same. The bones at the bottom of the chambers tell the same story either way. Something fell. Something did not get back up. The country above has long since grown over the openings. The cattle graze. The wineries operate. The tourists come and look at the reconstructions of the megafauna in the visitor centre and drive home through the green afternoon. The caves below stay cool and quiet and full of an air that has not been entirely fresh for 100,000 years. The system continues, out under the pasture, in directions that the surveyors have not yet had time to follow. Whatever the lower country is on its own terms, it is. It has not moved. It has simply waited. Number 12. Engelbrecht Cave and the Blue Lake. A little to the west of Naracoorte, in the volcanic country around Mount Gambier, the rock changes. The limestone is still there, underneath. But the surface is dominated now by the remains of relatively young volcanic activity. Old craters, old lava flows, old vents that, in geological terms, are not very old at all. Some of the volcanic features in that area are only a few thousand years old, which is barely any time at all. And it is in the middle of that volcanic country, in the very middle of the town of Mount Gambier itself, that you find one of the strangest natural features in the country, the Blue Lake. The Blue Lake is a crater lake. It sits inside the remains of an old volcanic crater, a deep, almost perfectly circular bowl in the ground, filled with water. The water itself is the unusual part. For half the year, roughly from November through March, the water in the Blue Lake is a deep, intense, almost unnatural blue. The kind of blue you usually only see in tropical seas or in photographs that have been touched up. Then, sometime in March or April, the color changes. It turns to a duller, grayer, more ordinary watercolor. It stays that way through the cooler months. Then, in November, almost overnight, the lake turns back to its impossible blue and stays that way until the cycle repeats. The official scientific explanation involves temperature, calcium carbonate, and the way light scatters off very small particles in the water. The explanation is, as far as it goes, correct. The particles do scatter the light. The temperature does affect their behavior. The blue is, on a strict physical level, accounted for. What is not so easily accounted for, again, is what is underneath. The Blue Lake is not a closed system. The water in it is not just sitting there. It is connected. It is part of a much larger underground water network that runs through the limestone beneath the volcanic crust of the region. And running through that same limestone underneath the streets of Mount Gambier is a cave system that the local cavers have been carefully mapping for decades. The most famous part of that system is Engelbrecht Cave. The entrance to Engelbrecht Cave is in the middle of suburban Mount Gambier. It is in a residential area. You walk in past houses, past gardens, and there is the entrance. A great natural opening in the ground, at the bottom of a small grassy depression. You climb down into it. The first chamber is dry and dusty. The second chamber, lower down, has water. The water is clear and cold and goes much further than you can see. The cavers who dive Engelbrecht Cave will tell you that the system extends in multiple directions, and that some of those directions go under streets, under houses, under shops. There are sections of Engelbrecht that have been explored and mapped and made available for guided dives. There are sections that have not, and the deeper passages, which are still being slowly extended by careful diving teams, are not simply going further out under the town. They are going in directions that connect, or appear to connect, to the wider regional water system, the same system that feeds the Blue Lake, the same system that breathes in and out of the Naracoorte caves to the east, the same system that, if you keep following it on the maps, appears to connect through smaller and smaller and harder to access passages to all sorts of other things. The Boandic stories about the Blue Lake describe it as the eye of something larger. The eye looks up. The thing it belongs to, in those stories, lives underneath, and its body extends through the rock in directions that go far beyond what is visible from the rim of the crater. The blue color that comes in summer is, in some versions of the story, the eye opening. The grey color that comes in winter is the eye closing. The animal of the lower country sleeps half the year and wakes the other half. The textbook will not describe it that way. The textbook will describe seasonal stratification and biogeochemical cycling. But the textbook does not deny that the lake is connected. The textbook does not deny that the system underneath it is, in its full extent, unmapped. The textbook does not deny that the cavers who go down into Engelbrecht and follow the passages out from there have, more than once, encountered such galleries that the survey did not predict. and that, by the patterns of air and water flow within them, must connect to something larger somewhere out under the surface. The town of Mount Gambier goes about its day. The traffic moves up and down the main street. The schools take groups of children to the lookout above the lake. The lake stays its impossible blue for half the year, and its quieter grey for the other half. And somewhere underneath, through passages that are still being slowly added to the map, the system continues, connected, unmapped, patient. Number 13, Mole Creek and Maricopa. We cross water now. We leave the mainland behind and travel south, across the strait, into Tasmania. The country changes immediately. It is greener, it is wetter, it is older, in a slow, visible way that you can feel before you can describe. The mountains have been worn down for so long that they sit low against the sky. The trees in the forest are species that exist nowhere else on Earth. The air smells of damp moss and cold water, and the slow, patient decay of plants that have been falling on top of each other for longer than any human has been keeping track. In the middle of that country, in the north of Tasmania, in a quiet valley sitting between forested ridges, there is a small town called Mole Creek. The town itself is a few streets, a few shops, a few houses. The country around it is dairy farms and cool forest, and running underneath all of it, through the limestone that lies beneath the soil, is a cave system that, even by Australian standards, is large. The Mole Creek Karst is a network. The cavers who work it have identified more than 300 separate caves in that one small valley. 300. Some of them are little more than holes you can stick your arm into. Some of them are entrances to chambers larger than a town hall. Most of them are not open to the public. The two that are open are the show caves of Maricopa and King Solomon's.
Maricopa is the more famous.
The name itself comes from a local Aboriginal word for handsome. The cave was, until relatively recently, called the glowworm cave, because of the colonies of bioluminescent insect larvae that live in some of its inner chambers. You walk through the lit sections on the tour. The path is paved. The lights are tasteful. And then, in one of the inner chambers, the guide turns off the lights. The complete absence of light underground is its own experience. You cannot describe it to someone who has not stood in it. There is no faint glow at the edges of things. There is no shape to the dark. The dark is total. And then, slowly, as your eyes adjust, you start to see them. The glowworms. Thousands of tiny blue-green points on the ceiling above you, scattered like stars across a deep and silent sky. They are not technically worms. They are the larvae of a small fly. They produce the light to attract their prey. The ecological explanation is straightforward. But standing under the ceiling in the absolute dark, watching what looks like a private constellation hanging above your head, the explanation does not really matter. The feeling stays with you for a long time. The thing the textbook will not tell you about Maricopa, the thing it will not tell you about the wider Mole Creek system, is how connected everything is. The cavers have done dye tracing in the area, similar to the work that was done at Buchan. They have introduced harmless dyes into the water at one cave entrance and waited to see where the dye emerges. The results have been, in the polite language of cave reports, surprising. Water introduced at one entrance has come out at entrances kilometers away. Water introduced at the head of a small creek has emerged at the bottom of a different valley altogether, on the other side of a hill that should, in theory, have separated the two systems. The implication, drawn slowly and carefully by the people who have to argue these findings against the standard maps, is that the Mole Creek system is not 300 separate caves. It is one system. One vast, branching, partly flooded network, with 300 known surface entrances and an unknown number of submerged ones. The Trawlwoolway and Pakana people, whose traditional country includes that part of Tasmania, have stories about the country there. They speak of a path under the hills. They speak of water that goes into the ground in one place and comes out in another. They speak of a creature, again, sometimes described as a serpent, sometimes described as an eel, sometimes described in language that does not translate easily into English at all, that moves along that path under the hills. The creature is not just any creature, it is a maker. It is one of the beings that shaped the country in the first ancestral times. The path it moves along is the path it made, in the act of moving. The cavers who work Mole Creek will tell you, very quietly, that the more they survey the system, the more it begins to look the way the old stories describe it, not as a collection of independent caves, as a single connected route. The forest above is wet. The fields are green. The cattle graze in the late afternoon light, and underneath them, the system breathes. Cold air comes from the openings in winter. Warm air comes from the openings in summer. The lungs of something very old, doing the slow work of staying alive, in a place that the surface has long since stopped paying attention to. Number 14. Hastings Caves. Further south still in Tasmania, down into the colder, wilder country at the bottom of the island. Into the country of deep forest and high rainfall and slow rivers running over stones that have not moved for tens of thousands of years. The Hastings Caves. They are the southernmost show cave system in Australia. The drive-in is through tall, wet forest, the kind of forest where the trees are old enough to have witnessed the colonial period from start to finish and to still have plenty of life in them. The visitor centre is small. The walking path to the main cave goes through the forest, climbing gently, past clear cold pools fed by underground springs. And then you arrive at the entrance, which is in the side of a hill, and you go in. The Hastings system is unusual for an Australian cave system in that it formed not in limestone, but in dolomite. Dolomite is a related rock, slightly different in its chemistry, slightly different in the way it weathers, slightly different in the kinds of formations it produces. The result is a cave that looks similar to a limestone cave at first glance, but feels different when you spend time in it. The colours are a touch warmer. The textures of the rock are slightly more granular. The formations have a particular way of catching the light that you do not see in the famous show caves of the mainland. It is a quiet cave. It does not have the grand scale of Jenolan or the long submerged passages of Cocklebiddy. What it has instead is a deep stillness, a sense that the cave is not really concerned with the people walking through it, a sense that the cave has been here for a long time and will be here for a long time after. The official tour ends in a particular chamber. Beyond that chamber, the system continues. The cavers who have worked Hastings will tell you, and they will tell you in the same patient, careful voice, that all serious cavers use when they are trying not to overstate what they have found, that the cave keeps going. There are passages beyond the tour that have been mapped. There are passages beyond those that have not. There are passages that go down. There are passages that go sideways under the surrounding forest. And there is a feature of the Hastings system that is, in geological terms, slightly difficult to explain. The water, springs come up out of the ground in the area around Hastings that, like the thermal pool at Yarrangobilly, are warmer than the surface temperature should allow. Not as warm as the Yarrangobilly pool, but warmer than the cold Tasmanian air should produce. The water that comes up at the Hastings hot springs has, by the time it reaches the surface, been somewhere. It has been deep. It has picked up heat from the deep earth. It has risen back to the surface through a route that nobody can see. The route is, in principle, mappable. In practice, it has not been mapped. It runs through passages that are too tight, too flooded, too deep, or simply too unknown for any survey to have reached. The Trawulway and Palawa stories about that part of Tasmania describe the underground country there in language that, if you sit with it for a while, sounds a great deal like what the cavers and the geologists are describing in their more careful technical reports. There is a path under the country. The path connects warm places to other warm places. The path is old. The path has its own life. The wet forest above stays wet. The springs come up out of the moss, and the dolomite stays cold and patient in the dark. Number 15. Margaret River Caves. We return now to the mainland. We travel west, all the way to the western edge of the continent, down to a part of Western Australia where the limestone country meets the Indian Ocean. The cliffs along that coast are made of a particular kind of limestone, formed when the climate of the region was very different from what it is today, when the sea was higher, and the air was wetter. And the surface of the country was being slowly built up out of crushed shells and ancient marine sediments compressed over long stretches of time. The country behind the cliffs is now dry forest and vineyards and small towns. But underneath the forest and the vineyards, the limestone is honeycombed. There are, by the most recent count, over 350 caves in the Margaret River region. Most of them are not open to the public. 3 of them are: Jewel Cave, Lake Cave, Mammoth Cave. Each one of these has its own character and its own particular features. Jewel Cave has long, fine, thin formations called helictites that twist in ways that gravity alone should not allow, growing sideways and even slightly upwards from the ceiling and walls. The cause of helictite formation is not perfectly understood by geologists. There are theories involving capillary action, mineral content, and the slow shaping influence of unusual air currents in the cave during its formation. The theories all account for the phenomenon partly. None of them account for it completely. The result is that Jewel Cave contains formations that look, to the eye, deliberately shaped, even though they are produced by entirely natural processes that we do not yet fully understand. Lake Cave is named for the large, still body of water that fills its main chamber. The reflections of the formations in the surface of the lake make the chamber feel inverted, as if you were standing not at the top of a cave, but at the center of a much larger space, with formations rising and falling in both directions, above and below. The effect is unsettling and beautiful at the same time. Mammoth Cave is the largest of the 3 open to the public, and it is also the most fossil-rich. Bones of extinct Australian megafauna have been found in its deeper sections, including the giant short-faced kangaroo and the marsupial lion and the giant wombat. The cave acted, here as at Narracoorte and at Wellington, as a long pitfall trap. Animals fell in. Generations of bones accumulated. The dust at the bottom of the chambers is layered with the history of a continent. The textbook treats these 3 caves as the highlights of the Margaret River system. They are the highlights, in the sense that they are open to the public and well surveyed and tourist-friendly. They are not, however, the entirety of the system. The other 350 plus caves include passages that are not on any published map. The Wadandi people, whose country includes the Margaret River area, have a long set of stories about the country there. They have stories about caves. They have stories about what lives in the caves. They have stories, most importantly for our purposes tonight, about how the caves connect. There is in the old stories a being called the Ngilgi. The Ngilgi is sometimes described as a good spirit, sometimes as a powerful spirit, sometimes as a being whose precise nature is not for outsiders to know. The Ngilgi lives in the caves. The caves are not separate places to the Ngilgi. They are different rooms in a single house. The Ngilgi moves through that house, room to room, by paths that are not visible to ordinary people. The Wadandi stories describe the caves of Margaret River as belonging together, as parts of one structure, as a single network that you can enter at many different doors. And when the modern cavers who work that country sit down with the maps of all the known caves in the region and try to plot the survey lines side by side, the picture that begins to emerge looks more like the Wadandi stories than like the official tourist brochure. The caves connect. The passages at depth run into one another. The water beneath them flows along a single underground table that runs from the cliffs at the coast back inland for tens of kilometers. The system is, on every measure that matters, a system. It is just not one that has yet been formally mapped from end to end. The vineyards above produce their wine. The tourists drive between the 3 open caves and take their photographs, and post their photographs and leave. The wider system, with all its other doors, stays out of the photographs. It does not need to be seen to be there. Number 16. Chillago. We move now to the far north of Queensland, into the rough, hot, beautiful country, inland from Cairns, past the tablelands, into a region where the rivers are seasonal, and the trees are dry, and the rock comes out of the ground in shapes that look like nothing else on the continent. The Chillago Mungana Karst. The country there is dominated by extraordinary outcrops of dark, almost black limestone, weathered into towers and spires and walls that rise sharply out of the otherwise flat scrub. From a distance, they look like the ruined battlements of something. They look constructed. They look as if a city, or several cities, once stood there and were then partly demolished and left to weather. The geological explanation is that this is what limestone does in a tropical climate over very long stretches of time. The acid in the rain, the heat of the sun, the chemistry of the soil, all work together to dissolve the rock unevenly. Soft parts are carried away. Hard parts are left standing. The result, over millions of years, is towers. Towers of limestone, rising from a plain that used to be at the same level as their tops. The towers look constructed because the process that made them resembles the kind of selective removal that human builders use to leave certain shapes standing. The towers were not, of course, constructed. The textbook is clear on that point. Nature did this on her own, and inside the towers and underneath them, the rock is hollow. There are caves at Chillagoe. There are many caves at Chillagoe. There are caves you can walk into through the side of a tower and walk out through a different tower hundreds of meters away. There are caves that drop straight down into the earth from the tops of the spires. There are caves whose floors are dry and whose ceilings are still dripping. There are caves where the inside is so different from the outside that walking from one into the other feels like walking from one country into another. The famous caves open to the public at Chillagoe include Royal Arch Cave and Donna Cave and Treskin Cave. Each one is worth its own attention. Each one is worth its own quiet hour. But the famous caves, again, are only the surface of what is there. The Chillagoe karst contains over 600 separate identified cave openings. 600 in a relatively small area. The system is, by any honest measure, one of the largest concentrations of cave entrances anywhere on the continent. And the question of how those caves connect, of what runs between the towers under the surface of the plain, is one that has occupied cavers and geologists in the region for many decades. The dye tracing studies, again, have produced results that the surface maps would not have predicted. Water introduced at the top of one tower has emerged at the base of another. Water from a sinkhole in one part of the plain has come out at a spring in a different part of the plain, kilometers away, across country, that the surface map suggests should be entirely separate. The Babaram and Wakaman people, whose country includes parts of the Chillagoe region, have stories about the towers and what lies beneath them. They describe the towers, in some accounts, as the remains of something that used to be much larger, when the structure that the towers belonged to was still whole, when you could walk through it the way you would walk through a great hall. They describe the time of breaking, when whatever happened that left the country in its present state did happen, and the towers were what remained. The textbook will offer a different account, of course. The textbook will speak of a slowly subsiding land surface and a rising water table and millions of years of differential erosion. The textbook is not lying. But the textbook and the old stories, again, are not as far apart as they might first appear. Both describe a process by which something whole became something broken. Both describe the towers as remnants. Both describe the caves between and below the towers as the inside of what is no longer there. The temperature at Chillagoe in the middle of the day can be punishing. The sun reflects off the pale dust around the bases of the towers. The cicadas make a sound like a single high continuous note that does not stop for hours. By stepping into the dark of one of the cave openings, the temperature drops immediately. The sound of the cicadas falls away. And the air, when you stand still and listen, has a slow, gentle movement in it, as if the cave were drawing breath from somewhere out beyond the limit of what you can see, and giving it back somewhere out beyond the limit of what you can see, and was prepared to do that for as long as the country itself was willing to let it. Number 17. Capricorn Caves. Further south in Queensland, on the eastern side of the Dividing Range, in country that runs down towards the coastal city of Rockhampton, there is a cave system that does not appear on most national tourism lists, the Capricorn Caves. They are a private operation. They have been run by a single-family enterprise for generations. They are quiet, they are well looked after, and they are, in their own way, very strange. The caves at Capricorn formed in a band of limestone that, like the limestone at Chillago and at Margaret River, sits in country that is otherwise mostly made of different rocks. The limestone here is a kind of island, surrounded by older, harder material, and that fact alone tells you something about how it got there. It was once a coral reef. A long time ago, on a much warmer and wetter earth in shallow tropical seas, that part of what is now central Queensland was the floor of a great living reef. The reef grew and built up its skeleton for millions of years. Then the seas retreated. The reef became dry. The dry reef became rock. The rock was uplifted. And then, slowly, over the course of more millions of years, the same processes that produce caves everywhere else got to work on it. The result is a system that is, in some ways, more architectural than most cave systems. The chambers at Capricorn have a strange quality of feeling planned. The walls in many places rise straight up. The ceilings, in places, run flat for considerable distances. The transitions between chambers, in the parts that are open to the public, often happen through gaps that feel less like the random openings water leaves and more like the doorways of rooms. The geological explanation, again, has to do with the original structure of the ancient reef. Coral reefs build in layers, they build in patterns, they build with internal voids and channels that, when the whole structure is later uplifted and partly dissolved, leave behind cave geometry that reflects the original architecture of the living reef. That is, on a strict scientific level, what is happening at Capricorn. You are walking through the partly dissolved remains of an ancient living structure, and the structure is shaped the way it is shaped because of how the original organisms built it. That is, by any standard, an extraordinary thing to walk through. The Darumbal people, whose country includes the Capricorn region, have their own stories about that part of the world. They describe the country there as a country that holds the memory of an older sea. They describe the rock as remembering when it was alive. They describe the caves as a place where you can sometimes hear, very faintly, the sound of the sea that used to be there. The cavers who work the Capricorn system will tell you, again very carefully, that there are passages going off visitor sections that have been mapped, that the system is larger than the public face of it suggests. They will tell you that some of the unmapped sections appear by the way air and water move through them, to connect to something further out, possibly to another part of the limestone band that is now buried under the surrounding country. The visitor centre has a small shop. The family who run the operation are friendly and unassuming. The caves are quiet and clean and well lit in the parts where the public goes. And behind that, in the parts where the public does not go, the old reef continues, full of memory and full of roots and full of the sound, if you stand very still and listen, of an ocean that has been gone for a very long time, but that has not been gone for as long as you might assume. Number 18, Kata Kata. We move now into the Northern Territory, into the country south of Darwin, into the tropical country, where the seasons are not summer and winter but wet and dry, into a part of the world where the rain, when it comes in great vertical sheets that turn the dry tracks into rivers within minutes. The Kata Kata Caves. The name itself, in the local language, means a place of stars. The reason for that name is not that the caves are dark and the sky is bright, although both of those things are true. The reason is what is inside the caves. The walls of certain chambers at Kata Kata are covered with small clusters of pale crystals, mostly calcite, that catch the light in a particular way and, when illuminated by torchlight in the right way, look exactly like fields of stars. Stars, in the old account of the country, are the things that live above. The caves, with their walls of stars, are the place where the things above and the things below are reflected into one another. The geological explanation for the crystals has to do with the slow drip of mineral-rich water, layer by layer, leaving behind tiny accumulations of calcite that grow into the cluster formations. The explanation is good. The clusters are real. The walls do look like stars. The Kata caves are also notable for their wildlife. They are home to large colonies of bats and to several species of cave-dwelling animals, including a particular kind of brown tree snake that has adapted to hunt the bats in the dark. The ecology of the caves is interesting in its own right, but the structure of the caves is what concerns us tonight. Kata is part of a much wider karst system that extends through the limestone country south of Catherine, including caves that are now flooded, caves that are now collapsed, and caves that have never been formally explored at all. Some of the most extensive of these are in country that is sacred to the Join and other traditional owners, and so they have not been open to public exploration and would not be appropriate to describe in detail. What we can say is that the system as a system is large. It is much larger than the publicly known caves alone. And the Jawoyn stories about that country describe it the way the stories from other parts of Australia have described their own country tonight. They describe a network. They describe a path under the country. They describe a creature that moves along that path. Sometimes a serpent, sometimes a different being, but always something that knows the route from end to end. They describe the caves as the places where the path comes close to the surface, where the creature lets itself be seen. In a way, by the rock and by the people who are paying attention to the rock. The textbook will speak of a regional karst aquifer. The Jawoyn will speak of the path of the creature. The same underground country lies between both descriptions, and the same underground country is not yet fully mapped. The wet season comes. The water rises in the system. Some of the lower chambers fill completely. The bats roost higher up. The snakes follow them. The walls of stars stay where they are, slowly accumulating their crystals one drop at a time. The dry season comes. The water falls. The lower chambers drain. The cycle repeats. And, underneath all of it, the system that connects everything continues to do what it does, which is to be there in the dark, with passages going off in directions that nobody has fully traced, towards somewhere that nobody has yet learned to put a name on. Number 19, the Great Artesian Basin. And now we come to the last place, the biggest place, the place that everything we have visited tonight, every cave and every tunnel and every chamber and every spring, in one way or another, sits on top of, or feeds into, or is connected to, the Great Artesian Basin. The Great Artesian Basin is not a cave. It is not a tunnel. It is not a single chamber that you can walk into. It is something else. It is, in the strict definition that the hydrogeologists use, a vast underground reservoir of water held in porous rock, extending under the surface of the country, across roughly 1/5 of the entire Australian continent. 1/5. Take a map of Australia. Imagine a great curving region that covers most of Queensland, a large part of New South Wales, the eastern third of South Australia, and a substantial portion of the Northern Territory. All of that from the surface looks like normal country. Plains, deserts, dry grasslands, the occasional river. Underneath all of that, kept at varying depths beneath the rock, sometimes a few hundred meters down, sometimes more than a kilometer down, is water. An enormous, slowly moving body of fresh water, held in the spaces between the grains of buried sandstone, recharged from the high country far to the east, flowing slowly westward and downward through the rock at the pace of, in some places, only 1 meter or 2 per year. The volume of water held in the Great Artesian Basin is hard to grasp. Estimates vary, but the consensus figures put it at something in the order of 64,000 cubic kilometers of water. 64,000 cubic kilometers. That is more water than is contained in all of the Great Lakes North America combined. Several times over. That is enough water that, in the parts of the basin where the geology happens to be right, the water comes up out of the ground on its own. You drill a hole. You drill down through the impermeable layers. You reach the water-bearing sandstone underneath, and the water rises on its own pressure, all the way to the surface, and sometimes higher than the surface, into the air. That is what artesian means. The pressure of the deep water pushing up. The basin was named for this property which was first noticed by European settlers in the late 19th century, when bores drilled in the hope of finding modest groundwater turned out, instead, to be producing limitless streams of hot water, rising spontaneously out of the desert. The early stations that exploited those bores became famous. The water that came up was warm because it had been deep for a very long time. The water was, in many places, very old. The dating studies that have been done on water from various points in the Great Artesian Basin have produced results that, when they were first published, were difficult for the geological community to fully absorb. Some of the water deep in the basin is more than 1 million years old. Some of it, in the deeper and slower flowing parts, is closer to 2 million years old. The water that comes up at the Great Mound Springs of South Australia, the springs that have been used as crucial stopping points by Aboriginal travellers for tens of thousands of years, and by European explorers for the last few hundred, is water that fell as rain on the slopes of the Great Dividing Range an extremely long time ago. And that has been making its slow, gradual journey through the rock ever since. When you put your hand into that water, you are putting your hand into rain that fell on the mountains a very long way away and a very long time ago. Now, the textbook description of all of this is mostly accurate. The hydrogeology of the Great Artesian Basin is, in its broad outlines, reasonably well understood. The recharge happens in the east. The flow goes west and south. The discharge happens at the mound springs and at certain coastal margins, and at the bores that humans have drilled. There is, on a regional level, a model of how the system works. The model is a good model. The model is also, in important ways, incomplete. The model treats the basin primarily as a body of water held in porous rock, water trickling slowly through the spaces between grains of sand. That is, no doubt, the bulk of what is happening. But it is not all of what is happening. The basin includes, within its enormous extent, sections where the water is not just trickling through porous rock. It is moving through actual passages, open channels, conduits, the same kinds of underground waterways that we have been looking at all night. In cave after cave and karst system after karst system, the entire length of the country, the water in the Great Artesian Basin moves, in those sections, through tunnels. The tunnels are old. The tunnels are large enough in places to constitute genuine cave systems in their own right. The tunnels connect. They connect to the caves of the Nullarbor. They connect to the caves of the Narracordy system. They connect, by way of branching subsidiary aquifers, to the caves at Buchan and at Wellington and at Jenolan. They connect in the north to the systems beneath the Cutta Cutta limestone, and to the great submerged karst of the Kimberley, further west again. The Great Artesian Basin is not just a passive reservoir. It is, in important sections, an active network of underground tunnels, water-filled, light-free, very old, and very large. And here is the part that the textbook still has trouble fully accepting. The map of those tunnels is not complete. It cannot be complete. The tunnels are too far down, too flooded, too dispersed across too much country. No human has walked them. No camera has been pushed all the way through them. The model we have is built by inference, by drilling holes and measuring pressures, by tracking the slow movement of water from point to point, by taking the chemistry of the water at one place and matching it to the chemistry of the water at another place to confirm they belong to the same flow. The model is built the way you would build a model of a great building, by walking around its outside and feeling the walls without ever being able to go in. The basin does have an inside. The inside has structure. The structure is, in honest scientific terms, not fully mapped. The traditional owners of all the country that sits over the Great Artesian Basin, the many, many different nations whose lands include sections of that vast region, have, between them, a collection of stories that describe the country below the surface in remarkable consistency. There is a path. There is a network of paths. There is water that goes from one place to another. There are creatures, again, sometimes serpents, sometimes other beings, that move along the network of paths. The creatures know the routes. The creatures are not random elements of the system. They are, in the old understanding, the system itself alive in the act of being itself. The mound springs, where the water comes up at the surface, are the places where the creatures pause, the places where the network surfaces, the places where the lower country and the upper country exchange breath. The descriptions of the network, when you collect them across all the nations whose country sits on top of the basin, do not contradict each other. They agree. They agree in the same way the dye tracing studies of the cave systems agree. They describe a connected thing. A network. A system, a single underground country with its own geography. And when you take the modern hydrogeological map of the Great Artesian Basin, and you take the collected map of the old stories, and you lay them on top of each other, you do not get two pictures. You get one picture, slightly differently drawn, in slightly different languages, using slightly different conventions, but the same underlying country. The basin recharge zones are in the same places that the stories identify as the heads of the paths. The basin discharge zones are in the same places that the stories identify as the mouths. The major flow paths run in the same directions, sit at the same places where the stories locate certain features of the lower country. The picture is the same picture, and the picture is, on either reading, of something very large and very old and very interconnected and very much still down there. The Great Artesian Basin is the network we have been walking towards all night. It is the network that all the caves we have visited, in all the different parts of the country, eventually connect to. Kubapeti sits in country that, underneath the dry surface, is partly fed by the western edge of the basin. The Nullarbor caves at Cocklebiddy and Cunalda and Murruwidgini connect, through deep flooded passages, to subsidiary aquifers that are themselves connected, however slowly, to the wider basin system to the east. The cave systems of New South Wales at Jenolan and Wellington, and Yarrangobilly and Wombeyan sit in the recharge country, the eastern country where the water enters. The caves of Victoria at Buchan, the caves of South Australia at Narracorday and at the Blue Lake, the caves of Tasmania at Mole Creek and Hastings, the caves of Western Australia at Margaret River, the caves of Queensland at Chillago and at Capricorn, the caves of the Northern Territory at Cutta. All of them, in one way or another, are connected. Some of them through direct physical underground passages, some of them through shared aquifers, some of them through groundwater systems that link them at depths far greater than any human has ever walked. They are not separate. They are not and have never been separate. They are all the visible parts of a single hidden country. A country that sits underneath the country we live in. A country with its own geography. A country with its own rivers and its own chambers and its own routes and its own old paths. A country that does not appear on any of the road maps. A country that does not appear in its full extent on any of the official maps, because the official maps still treat each section as a separate aquifer, or a separate cave, or a separate spring, when in fact they are all parts of one body. A country that the people who lived on the surface for the last 60 or 70 or 80,000 years, depending on which dating you accept, were entirely aware of, and entirely capable and entirely respectful of, in a way that the modern surface culture is only beginning to relearn. So when we ask the question that we set out to ask at the start of tonight, when we ask what the tunnels of the Australian Outback connect to, the honest answer is that they connect to each other. They connect to the great hidden country below. They connect to the network that has been there, recharging in the east and flowing slowly west and welling up at the Mound Springs for many millions of years. They connect to a system that, in its full extent, has not been mapped. They connect, in the old stories, to the path of the creature that moves through the country, making and unmaking it. They connect, in the modern science, to the slow flow of water held in rocks that the surface barely knows are there. And whether you call it an aquifer or you call it a path, whether you call it cast conduit or you call it the road of the serpent, the underlying thing is the same. There is a country underneath this country. The country underneath is bigger than the country on top. The country underneath is older than the country on top. The country underneath is still there. The country underneath is connected to itself. And the tunnels we visited tonight, every one of them, from the homes carved into the sandstone at Kubapedi to the warm springs welling up at the Blue Lake at Mount Gambier to the limestone honeycomb beneath the vineyards at Margaret River, are doors. They are doors into the same hidden building. A building whose interior nobody has finished walking. A building that, by any reasonable measure, is the largest hidden structure on this continent. A building that has been quietly there, beneath the surface, for very much longer than anything we've built on top. So that is the 19 places. That is the underground country, room by room, door by door. And before we let the night go properly soft on us, before we let the words drift. At this hour, it is worth sitting with the picture for a moment longer. It is worth letting it settle. We started in the middle of the country, at Kubapedi, where the people live in the rock. That is, when you stop and think about it, one of the more unusual choices any community on Earth has made about where to put their homes, to live underground, to prefer the dark stillness of the rock to the bright open air of the surface. The official reason is heat, and the heat is real, but the heat alone does not quite account for the depth of the commitment. Other hot places in the world do not have whole towns dug into hillsides. Other hot places have built up shade, and shutters, and thick walls, and verandas, and the dozens of other ways human beings have learned to keep the worst of the sun off. Kubapedi did not just shade itself, it went down. It went all the way down. And once you are down, once you are inside the rock, you begin to notice how much rock there is. You begin to notice how much room there is in the rock. You begin to notice that the people who first started living that way may have understood something about the country they were on, that the surface dwellers of the early colonial period did not understand. The country has space below as well as space above. The space below is on a strict volume basis, comparable to the space above. And the space below is more constant. The space below does not change with the seasons. The space below does not get blown around by the wind. The space below is, in its own quiet way, available in a way that nowhere on the surface ever quite is. So you go down. And once you go down, once enough people go down, the question of how the down places relate to each other naturally begins to arise. We do not, after all, live alone. Even in our houses on the surface, we connect. We build roads. We dig trenches for cables. We lay pipes. We make the connections that turn separate houses into a town. If a number of separate underground homes were built in the same general area, it would be strange. If they did not, after long enough, become connected. Kubapedi is, in its modern form, a town of connected underground spaces. The tunnels between the homes and the mines and the shops and the churches are a result of that simple human impulse, applied below the surface instead of above it. And then, as we moved out from Kubapedi, we found that the connections did not stop where the town stopped. The mining tunnels keep going. The natural caves keep going. The aquifers and the karst systems and the deeper waters keep going. The underground country keeps going. And the further you follow it in any direction, the more it begins to look like a single thing, rather than many separate things. We went west to the Nullarbor. We sat for a while at Cocklebiddy, with its long flooded passages that the divers cannot reach the end of. And at Cunalda, with the wall of soft drawn lines that someone made by hand by torchlight 20 or 30,000 years ago. And at Murrawidginy, with the careful red prints of all those hands. Family after family, generation after generation, leaving the mark that says we were here. The Nullarbor is, by every honest measure, one of the largest single hidden cave systems on the planet. And the part of it that has been surveyed is a small fraction of what is actually there. The part that has been surveyed connects, in its deeper passages, to other parts that have not been surveyed. The other parts that have not been surveyed connect in turn to passages further out that nobody has even reached yet. The system grows the more you map it. Not because the rock is changing, but because the survey is catching up to what was always there. Then we went east, through the high country of New South Wales, through Jenolan, the oldest open cave system on Earth, 340 million years of patient slow water working at the stone, the place that was already very old when the dinosaurs first walked, through Wellington, with its bones of the megafauna, the layered dust of a world that was here before us. Through Yarrangobilly, with its warm pool welling up in the middle of the cold mountains. Water that has been deep and is now back at the surface. Breath of a country that breathes. Through Wombian, with its white marble chambers and the strange clean angles of its walls. Through Abercrombie, with the grand arch, that vast tunnel of stone that the textbook calls a river cave, and the old stories call a doorway. Two names for the same enormous opening, through which something used to pass. Then south into Victoria to Buchan, with its lead formations and its delicate decorated chambers and hundreds of side passages that the cavers have not yet had time to map. Where water introduced at one point comes out at another point kilometres away that the surface survey would not have predicted. Then south again into South Australia to Narracourt, where the bones of the lost megafauna lie in their layered dust on the floors of the rooms below. In passages that, according to those who have spent the most time there, extend out under the pasture in directions the survey has not finished tracing. Then to Mount Gambier to Engelbrecht, where the cave runs underneath a town that lives in some quiet sense, on top of an old breath that is still moving. And to the blue lake above, with its impossible blue half the year and its quiet grey the other half, the eye, in the old description, of something that lives in the rock below. Then south again across the strait into Tasmania, to Mole Creek with its 300 surface entrances that all turn out, when you trace the water, to lead into a single connected system. A system the cavers describe with the same patient, careful voice they have used through this whole night, when they want to convey something they know to be true, without sounding as if they were trying to dramatize it. To Hastings, at the southern end of the country, the southernmost show cave system in Australia, where the Dolomite cave breathes its quiet breath, and the springs come up warm out of the moss in country that should by all rights only produce cold water. Then back across strait, all the way west, to the Margaret River caves, with their helictites and their lake reflections and their pitfall traps, full of the bones of vanished animals. All of them sitting in a piece of country that has, by the most recent count, over 350 caves in it, almost none of which is mapped to a publishable standard. Then north to Chillago, where the dark limestone towers rise up out of the dry plain like the broken remains of something that used to be larger, and the caves between them connect by passages the surface map does not show. Then southwest to Capricorn, with its old reef geometry, the inside of a long-dead living thing, still holding the shape of the way it once built itself. Then north again to Cutta, with its walls of stars, where the upper country and the lower country quietly mirror each other in the dark, watched over by bats and the occasional tree snake doing the slow business of being a tree snake. And then finally the basin, the great artesian basin, the vast slow body of water held in the rock beneath 1/5 of the continent. The recharge in the east, the flow to the west and south, the discharge at the Mound Springs, 64,000 cubic kilometres of water, much of it more than 1,000,000 years old. Much of it in the form, in places, of actual open tunnels, water-filled, light-free, large enough that the word tunnel is not a metaphor in those sections, but a description. The basin that all of the other places we visited tonight are, in one way or another, connected to. The basin that, when you put it together with all the cave maps and all the spring maps and all old stories from all the nations called the nations whose country sits, turns out to be the floor under everything we have walked across tonight. The single hidden country below the country we live in. The thing that the tunnels of the Outback connect to. The thing that has been there all along. So what do we do with that before we let sleep have us? We do, perhaps, what the people who first thought carefully about the country did. We let it be there. We do not need to map the whole of it in this minute. With our eyes closed in the dark on a quiet evening, we do not need to know exactly where every passage goes. We do not need to draw a finished diagram. We just need to know, in the way the body knows things before the head finishes naming them, that the country below is real, that it is connected, that it has been waiting longer than we have been here. that it is, in its own quiet way, full. There are three voices that tend to come up when you sit with a question like this. There is the voice of the textbook, the voice that speaks of karst aquifer systems and hydrogeological recharge zones and metamorphic limestone and biogeochemical cycling. That voice is doing its job. That voice is trying, in the language it knows, to describe what is real. The voice of the textbook is not wrong. It is one of the voices. The second voice is the voice of the old people, the Murning at Cunalda, the Wadandi at Margaret River, the Boandik at Narakorte, the Wiradjuri at Jenolan and at the Grand Arch, the Gunai Kanai at Buchan, the Ngarigo at Yarrangobilly, the Mbabram at Chiligo, the Durumbul at Capricorn, the Jawoyn at Kutta Kutta, the Trawulway and Pakana and Palawa in Tasmania, all the other nations besides, whose country we have moved through tonight, and whose names alone could fill another hour if we tried to name them all properly. That voice speaks of paths and creatures and lower countries and the road of the serpent. That voice has been speaking for a very long time, and it has been speaking, when you listen to it carefully, with a precision that the textbook is only beginning to match. That voice is not wrong either. That voice is the second of the voices. And then there is a third voice, not the textbook, not the old stories, something quieter than both. The voice that you sometimes hear, if you sit in a cave long enough, somewhere down past the lit section, somewhere in a chamber where the air is moving softly from somewhere to somewhere else, somewhere where the rock has not been told to be a tourist site or a sacred place or anything else in particular, somewhere where it is just rock, very old, very still, very large. That third voice does not say anything in words. It says, "This is here." It says, "This has been here." It says, "I have been here longer than the question you are asking." It does not contradict the textbook. It does not contradict the old stories. It is what both of them are pointing at, and it is what we have been walking towards all night, room by room, door by door, place by place. All the way from Coober Pedy to the Nullarbor, to the high country, to the green coast, to the islands and the tropics and the warm springs and the deep basin underneath. The third voice is the country itself, underneath the country on top, connected, old, still here. Let the picture settle a little more. You do not need to hold all of it at once. You do not need to remember every name, every cave, every spring, every passage. The country is patient. It does not require you to keep track of it. It will be there in the morning, exactly as it was tonight, exactly as it has been for the last. However many millions of years it has been quietly doing what it does. Let your shoulders drop. Let your hands rest. Let your head sink a little further into the pillow. The thing about a country that has been there for that long is that you do not need to grip it. You do not need to memorize it. You can rest in the knowledge that it is there. The same way you can rest in the knowledge that the sea is there, even when you cannot see it. The same way you can rest in the knowledge that the sky is there, even when you have stopped looking up. The country below is one of those things. It is not asking anything of you tonight. It is just there. It has its own slow, patient work to do. The work of letting water trickle through grains of buried sandstone over very long stretches of time. The work of letting limestone slowly dissolve and reform. The work of being the floor under the floor. You can sleep on top of all of it. You always have been sleeping on top of all of it. Tonight is no different. Tonight you simply know it a little better. Knowing the country below is there does not make it more dangerous. It does not make it more strange. If anything, it makes the country on top easier to inhabit. The country on top is, on its own, a thin layer, a skin of soil and rock and tree and town. A skin that can sometimes feel as if it were the whole of what is there. Knowing that the skin is sitting on top of a deep, connected, breathing, very old hidden country is in a way comforting. The skin is not alone. The skin has somewhere to rest. The skin has a foundation. We sometimes forget that. We sometimes act as if everything that exists is on the surface, as if the world were the parts of the world that we can see with our eyes in our day-to-day lives. The country below is a reminder that this is not the case. The country below is the part of the world that is not the visible part. The country below is, in a quiet way, the larger part. The visible country sits on top of it. The visible country, in a way, is its surface. The visible country is one face of a much larger thing, and the larger thing is steady. The larger thing is not changing on the timescales we worry about during the day. The larger thing does not care about anybody's small concerns. The larger thing is, the larger thing has been, the larger thing will continue to be. In the same slow, patient way it has always been. That is, when you let it in, a settling thought. A thought that lets the body slow down. A thought that lets the mind drop a little further towards the place where thoughts stop being words and start being something softer. Let it drop. Let the mind drop. The country below is large enough to hold any thought you would care to lower into it. The country below will not be disturbed by any sleeping thought that drifts down into it tonight. The country below is, among other things, where all the unspoken thoughts of the day eventually settle, when they are done circling above the pillow. The country below is a good place for them to go. It is a good place for them to rest. It is a good place for you to rest too. And so slowly, as the sound of the words gets a little softer, as the rhythm of the breath gets a little longer, as the weight of the body gets a little heavier into whatever you are lying on, the rooms of the night can begin to close. The room at Kubapeti, with the cool, still air and the smooth sandstone walls, that room can close. The light at the entrance can dim. The door at the top of the stairs can settle. The room becomes quiet, and the quiet becomes deeper than quiet. The chamber at Cocklebiddy, with the long flooded passage, going off into the dark beyond the limit of any torch, that chamber can close. The water in it does not stop moving. The water in it never stops moving. But you do not need to follow it tonight. You can let it go on by itself. The wall of finger flutings at Cunalda, the careful soft-drawn lines made by hand, by torchlight, 20 or 30,000 years ago. That wall can rest. The people who made those lines are not waiting for you to do anything with them. The wall is, in its own quiet way, complete. It has been complete for a long time. It can stay complete tonight. The handprints at Morawidgini, the hands of the children, the hands of the parents, the hands of the grandparents, red ochre on white limestone in chambers underneath the plain. The hands can stay where they have always been. They were placed carefully. They do not need to be tended to tonight. They are, in the very deepest sense, all right. The vast slow chambers of Janolan, 340 million years patient, the oldest open cave system on the surface of the planet. Those chambers can rest. They have rested before. They will rest again. The dust on the floors of the rooms at Wellington, layered with the bones of the megafauna, the silent record of a world before us, that dust can stay where it is. Nothing in it needs to be moved tonight. The warm pool at Yarrangobilly, welling up out of the rock in the middle of the cold high country. The water can keep coming up. The water has been coming up for longer than anyone can quite measure. It will keep coming up tonight whether anyone is watching it or not. The white marble chambers at Wombayarn, with their two clean angles and their two straight lines. Those chambers can sit. They're not asking to be explained tonight. They are simply being themselves, in their own particular way, in the dark. The great wide tunnel of stone at the Abercrombie Arch, the doorway in the old description, whatever passed through there, in whatever ancient time, has long since gone on. The arch remains. The arch can keep its long shadow over the small valley. The sound of the wind passing through it, if it is passing through it tonight, is doing what it has always done. The decorated chambers at Buchan, with all their delicate formations growing one drop at a time. The drops can keep falling. They have been falling for a very long time. They are not in any hurry. The rooms full of bones at Narrakorde, layered in dust beyond what any single mind can hold. The bones can rest in the dust. The dust can rest on the bones. The blue lake above Engelbrecht Cave at Mount Gambier, with its strange, impossible blue half the year and its quieter grey the other half. The lake can do what it does. The colour can change when it changes. The eye can be open or closed according to the season. The cave underneath it can keep breathing. The whole structure underneath the town can keep being what it is. The 300 entrances at Mole Creek. The connected system that turns out to be one system. The system can stay connected. The water can keep flowing along its long underground route from one cave entrance to another. In directions the surface map does not show. The dolomite chambers at Hastings, with their quiet stillness and their warm springs, welling up in the cold, wet forest above, those chambers can stay still. The springs can keep their gentle warmth. The forest can keep being wet. The 350 caves of the Margaret River country, the helictites, the lake reflections, the bones of the lost animals in the lower passages, all of that can stay. The whole great limestone honeycomb under the vineyards and the forest and the farms can keep being a honeycomb. The black limestone towers at Chillago, rising up out of the dry plain, like the broken remains of something. The towers can keep standing. The connections between them can keep being connections. The cicadas can keep their long single note over the bases in the heat of the day. And the dark can keep its slow, gentle breath inside the openings at night. The old reef chambers at Capricorn, the memory of an ancient sea held in the geometry of the walls. The reef can keep being a memory. The memory does not need to be revisited tonight. The walls of stars at Kata Kata, with their little clusters of calcite catching the imagined light of the imagined torch. The stars can stay on the wall. The bats can roost above them. The snakes can keep doing what snakes do. The wet season and the dry season can keep coming and going on, the schedule they have followed for thousands of years. And the great basin underneath it all, the long, slow water moving westward through the rock at the pace of a meter or two a year. The recharge in the east, and the discharge at the mound springs, and the chemistry that links it all together. The basin can keep being a basin. The water can keep flowing on its long, slow journey. The connections between the parts can stay where they are. The hidden country below the country can keep being the hidden country below the country. None of it needs anything from you tonight. None of it needs to be solved tonight. None of it needs to be mapped tonight. It is mapped, in a sense, already. The old people mapped it long ago in their stories. The dye traces and the bore readings and the careful surveys are slowly filling in the version that the modern surface culture is able to read. The two versions will, in time, meet in the middle. They are already in places, beginning to. But that meeting does not have to happen tonight either. Tonight, all you have to do is let the rooms close. Let the lights at the entrances dim, one by one. Let the small lit walkways through the show caves slowly turn themselves off, one chamber after another. Let the doors at the tops of the steps settle gently into place. Let the country below be quiet, and let the country on top be quiet. And let the layer of you on top of the country on top be quiet too. The breath gets longer, the shoulders get heavier, the thoughts get softer, the dark gets kinder. The country, in all of its connected, branching, breathing extent, simply continues to be. And that is enough. That is more than enough. The tunnels of the Outback connect, in the end, to a great, hidden, patient old country that has been here all along. That does not need to be mapped to be real. And that does not need anyone to be awake to keep being what it is. So you do not need to be awake either. You can let it carry you. The way the slow westward flow of water in the basin carries the rain that fell on the high country a long time ago, gently, with no particular hurry in the dark, towards somewhere quieter. You can drift the way that water drifts. You can settle the way that water settles. You can be still the way that water, in the deep, slow places, is still. The hidden country goes on whether you keep watching it or not. So, it is alright to stop watching it. It is alright to close your eyes. It is alright to let the sound of these words become a kind of low, even hum that does not quite resolve into language anymore. It is alright to let go of the picture. The picture will hold itself. The country below will hold the picture. The country below has been holding much larger pictures for much longer than tonight. So one more, of one quiet night, of one quiet listener, of one slow drift downwards into rest, will not be any trouble at all for it to hold. Let it hold you. Let the long, slow breath of the underground country be the long, slow breath you fall asleep on, in slow and gentle, out slow and gentle. The same way the air moves through the unmapped passages somewhere out under the nullarbor, in directions nobody has finished tracing. The same way the water moves through the rock under the basin, at its slow, patient, unhurried pace. The same way the stone has been doing whatever the stone has been doing for the entire long history of itself. Slow, gentle, connected, old, still here, still here, still here. There is one more thing worth letting drift through the mind, very softly, before the night closes over the words altogether. A thing that we have walked around all evening without saying directly, even though it has been there in every place we visited. The thing is about the word map. We use the word map to mean a piece of paper or a screen with lines on it that match the country it represents. That is one meaning of the word. It is the meaning that the surveyors use. It is the meaning that the geologists use. It is the meaning that most people, in most situations, understand the word to have. There is another meaning of the word map, however, a meaning that is older, and that has been used by people for as long as there have been people, a meaning that does not require any paper at all. The older meaning of map is held in memory. It is held in story. It is held in the long, careful repetition of the right information from one generation to the next. A map, in that older sense, is a path that you have learned. A map is what a person carries inside their head after walking the country, after listening to those who walked it before, after sitting with the country, long enough that its shape becomes a shape you know. The old people had maps in that sense. Detailed maps, accurate maps. Maps that included not only the surface of the country, but the country below the surface. Maps that included the names of every important feature, the songs that went with each one, the order in which they connected, the routes between them. Those maps were not written down on paper because they did not need to be. They were written down in the people who carried them. They were written down in the songs. They were written down, in some cases, in the marks made on the walls of caves like Cunalda. In patterns that have not yet been fully read, those maps were not lost. They were simply held in a way that the modern surface culture took a long time to recognize as a map at all. So when we say tonight that the tunnels of the Outback connect to something nobody has mapped, what we mean depends on what we mean by the word mapped. If we mean, in the strict modern sense, that no published cartographic survey covers the entire connected underground system with a single coherent set of lines, then yes, the system has not been mapped. The drilling has been done in patches. The cave surveys have been done in patches. The dye tracing studies have been done in patches. The pieces of the picture exist, but they have not been assembled into a single agreed map. That is true. That is what we have been describing all night. But if we mean, in the older sense, that nobody has ever known the country below, that nobody has ever carried it in mind, that nobody has ever held a working description of how the parts connect, then no, that is not quite true. The country below has been mapped. It has been mapped for a long time. It has been mapped by the people who lived on top of it for tens of thousands of years before any survey marker was put in the ground. The maps they made are still here. They are held in the stories. They are held in the songs. They are held in the careful descriptions of the path of the serpent, the path of the creature, the lower country, the country with two layers. Those descriptions, when you collect them and slay them side by side, when you treat them as the maps that they are, agree with each other in ways that no random collection of unrelated stories ever could. They describe the same country. They describe the same network. They describe the same connections. And the connections they describe are the same connections that the modern hydrogeologists are slowly confirming with their instruments. So the country below is not unmapped. The country below has been mapped, very carefully, by the people who took the time to know it. The thing that has not been mapped, in any honest accounting, is the meeting between the two ways of mapping. The textbook map is still being drawn. The story map has been complete for a long time. Two are slowly being laid on top of each other. They are slowly being read as different views of the same thing. Where that meeting goes in the next few decades, in the next century, in the long unfolding of the modern attempt to understand the country, is a matter that the next generation of geologists and hydrologists and traditional owners will work out together, in their own time, in their own way. None of that has to happen tonight. Tonight is for the quieter work. Tonight is for the soft work of letting the two pictures sit next to each other in the dark of the mind without forcing either of them to argue with the other. The textbook says aquifer. The old story says path of the creature. Both are true in their own languages. Both describe the same long, slow body of water moving westward through the rock under 1/5 of the continent. Both describe the same network of tunnels and chambers and springs that in their full extent exceed what any single human being has ever walked or any single survey has ever drawn. Both are correct. And tonight, in the soft hours before sleep, the most honest thing the mind can do is to let both of them be there at the same time, without choosing. The textbook in one corner, the old story in the other. The country itself, in the middle, being what it is, with no particular need to be named by either side. There is, in the country below, a generosity that the country above does not always show. The country below does not mind which language you use to describe it. The country below does not punish you for using the wrong word. The country below simply continues to be what it has always been, regardless of which surface community happens to be on top of it at the moment. Regardless of which descriptions are currently in fashion among the people who try to describe it. The country below is older than any of the descriptions. The country below will be there after any of the descriptions are forgotten. The country below is, in a sense, the constant. We are the visitors. The way the old families put their hands on the wall at Murrawidginy and leave the small mark that says we were here, and then the wall stays, and the next family comes, and the wall stays, and the family after that, and the wall stays. The wall is patient. The country is patient. The slow movement of water through the rock at 1 meter or 2 meters per year is patient. The drip of mineral water from the ceilings of the chambers building the formations, one molecule at a time, is patient. The cool, gentle breath of air through the unmapped passages of the Nullarbor in the long, quiet middle of the night, when no human is anywhere near them, is patient. All of it is patient. And tonight, for once, in the quiet space at the end of a day, you get to be patient too. You do not have to do anything with what we have walked through tonight. You do not have to remember it. You do not have to draw your own version of the map. You do not have to make a decision about which voice to believe. You just have to let the picture sit. The picture will hold itself. The country will keep the picture. The country has been keeping pictures for a very long time. One more of one quiet listener drifting off in one quiet room on one quiet night is not any burden at all. So let the picture sit. Let the breath slow. Let the room close around you, gently the way the chambers at the ends of long tours quietly close around the last group of visitors. The lights dim. The voices soften. The doors are gently shut. The chamber is left alone to be a chamber again. The chamber, on its own, in the dark with no one in it, is doing exactly what it has done all the rest of the time when no one was watching it. It is being a chamber. It is breathing very slowly. It is holding its own air. It is letting the small drops of water fall from the ceiling to the floor at the same slow rate they have been falling for thousands of years. It is being entirely itself, with no audience, with no commentary, with no expectations placed on it by anyone. That is a good thing for a chamber to be. And by the same logic, it is a good thing for a person to be too. Right now, in this minute, before sleep takes over the rest of the work, you can be entirely yourself, with no audience, with no commentary, with no expectations. The country below is being itself. You can be yourself. The chamber is being a chamber. You can be a person resting in a bed. The water in the basin is moving at its own slow pace. Your breath can move at its own slow pace. The slow, patient pace of the deep country is also available, in a way, as a pace for the body, slower than the pace of the day, slower than the pace of conversation, slower than the pace of any rush, the pace of the rock, the pace of the water that has been moving for 1,000,000 years. That pace is also a human pace, in the right circumstances. The right circumstance tonight is the circumstance of letting it be, letting the breath be slower, letting the shoulders be heavier, letting the head be more deeply settled, letting the small ordinary surface concerns of the day slide gently down off the body and onto the floor, and from the floor down through the floor, and from there down into the country below, where they will be received in the same patient way that the country below has received everything that has ever fallen into it, including, eventually, the bones of all the great vanished animals whose long deep silence we have walked through, tonight at Wellington, and at Narracourt, and at Mammoth. The country below can hold whatever needs to be held. It has been doing that for a long time. It will keep doing it for a long time. The night is in that sense very forgiving. The dark is in that sense very kind. The slow, gentle, invisible, patient breathing, connected old hidden country below the country we live in is, in its own way, a kind of company. A company that does not ask anything of you. A company that does not need you to perform. A company that is simply there, the way an old room in a quiet house is there. The room does not need you to entertain it. The room is fine. The country below is fine. You are fine. The night is fine. The breath gets even longer. The body gets even heavier. The mind gets even softer. The words eventually lose their edges. The shapes of the rooms eventually fade. The names of the places eventually blur together. Kubapeti, Cocklebiddy, Cunalda, Murawijini, Jenolan. Wellington, Yarrangobilly, Wombeyan, Abercrombie, Buchan, Narracorda, Mount Gambier, Mole Creek, Hastings, Margaret River, Chillago, Capricorn, Cutta, the Great Artesian Basin. The names lose their sharp edges and become a long, soft list. The list lengthens. The list shortens. The list becomes, eventually, just a slow, even hum in the room. The hum becomes the breath. The breath becomes the night. And the night, in the gentlest possible way, takes over from here. Theirs is, perhaps, one more thought worth letting drift, very softly, through the slowing mind, before sleep makes the final decision. A thought about time. About how much time has been involved in all of this. The chambers at Jenolan, 340 million years. The water in the deep parts of the basin, more than 1 million years old. The bones of the megafauna at Wellington and at Narracourt, hundreds of thousands of years deep in the dust. The finger flutings on the walls at Cunalda, 20 or 30,000 years old. The handprints at Murawijini, layered through perhaps as many thousands of years again. The mining tunnels at Kubapeti, only a century or so, but cut into rock that was already very old when the cutting began. All of these time frames are, when you sit with them, almost impossible to feel. They are too long. The human mind is not built to feel 1 million years in the way that it can feel a year. We can know the number. We can write the number down. We can multiply the number by other numbers and produce more numbers. But the actual feeling of 1 million years, the body sense of how much time that is not something the human nervous system has any straightforward way to produce. So we use shortcuts. We compare. We say that the caves at Jenolan are older than the dinosaurs, and we picture a dinosaur and we say to ourselves, all right, that is quite old. We say that the water in the basins was rain that fell when there were no humans on this continent yet, and we picture the rain falling on empty mountains, and we say to ourselves, all right, that is quite a while ago. The shortcuts work, more or less, in the way that any shortcut works. They let us deal with the number without having to fully process the underlying reality. But the underlying reality is still there, even when we are not processing it. And the underlying reality is that the country below has been doing what it has been doing for very long stretches of time. By every measure that anyone can produce. The country below was already an old country when the dinosaurs were new. The country below was already an established system, long before the human species existed at all. The country below has watched many surface arrangements come and go. It has seen seas rise and fall. It has seen forests cover the surface and then withdraw. It has seen ice sheets advance and retreat, again and again, at the cooler southern latitudes. It has seen the rise of the great inland lake systems and their slow drying out into the dry salt pans that we see today. It has seen the dust storms of the dry periods and the floods of the wet periods. Through all of it, the country below has stayed roughly the same. The water has continued to move slowly through the rock. The caves have continued to grow, drop by drop. The chambers have continued to hold their patient air. The connections between the parts have continued to do their slow work of being connections. The country below is, in that sense, more constant than the country above. The country above changes. The country below stays. And the staying is what gives the country below its particular quality. The quality of being a thing that does not have to worry about itself. The quality of being a thing that has already lasted longer than any threat it might face from a single century or a single millennium, or any other timescale that any single generation of people might happen to be alarmed about. The country below is, in a real sense, fine. It is more than fine. It is exactly what it has always been. There is something steadying about being near a thing that has that quality. Being near old stone, properly old stone, stone that was old before any of the standard human reference points existed, has a particular effect on the nervous system. The nervous system, which is built to keep track of changes, slows down a little in the presence of a thing that does not change. The breath gets longer. The shoulders soften. The small worries of the surface day get smaller by comparison. The country below, in that very simple way, is a kind of medicine. Not a medicine you have to take. Not a medicine that has to be prescribed. A medicine that is simply available by being near old country, or by knowing that old country is there, even when you cannot see it. Tonight you are knowing it. Tonight the knowledge of the country below is, in a small quiet way, doing its medicinal work. The nervous system is slowing down. The breath is lengthening. The small worries of the day are dropping back to where they belong. The country below, in its enormous, patient, unchanging way, is letting you know that Tata, whatever happened today, is not, on the timescales that matter to it, particularly important. That is not an unkind thought. That is a kind thought. The country below is not dismissing the day. The country below is offering perspective. The perspective of something that has seen many days, of many, many years, of many, many centuries, of many, many millennia, of many, many millions of years. The perspective of a thing for which any single day is so small that it cannot really be distinguished from any other single day. From the point of view of the country below, all of the days of all of the surface generations form a kind of soft, continuous hum. None of them stand out particularly. None of them register as crises. They are, all of them, just the small surface activity of a thin upper layer on top of the deep, slow, patient country that is doing the real work. That is, for the duration of a quiet evening, a perspective worth borrowing. You do not have to keep it. You can give it back in the morning, when the surface concerns return and have to be dealt with on their own terms. But for tonight, for the slow drift down into sleep, the perspective of the country below is yours to use. The perspective of slow, the perspective of patient, the perspective of already old before any of this began, and still here long after any of this ends. Let the perspective settle into the body. Let the body adopt the pace of the country below, just for the next few minutes, just for the slow drift down. The pace of the water that has been moving for 1,000,000 years. The pace of the limestone that has been dissolving for 100 million years. The pace of the chambers that have been quietly holding their breath for longer than any human language has existed to describe them. That pace is available. That pace right now is the pace at which sleep arrives. Not in a hurry, not on a schedule. Just in its own time, when the body and the mind have both slowed down enough to meet it. They are slowing down enough. They are nearly there. Let one more breath go out slowly. Let the air leave the body the way it leaves a chamber when no one is in it anymore. Just slowly, just gently. Just as the night quiets the rest of the room around you. Kubapedi again, one more time, very soft now. The cool, dark rooms cut into the sandstone, with the still air, with the absence of any sound from above. The country sleeping on top of itself. The nullarbor, again very soft. The vast flat plain with the empty sky and the limestone underneath. With the caves at Cocklebiddy and at Cunalda and at Murruwidgini, all quietly doing what caves do, in the dark with no one in them, breathing their long, slow breath. The high country, with the caves at Jenolan and at Wellington and at Yarrangobilly and at Wombian and at Abercrombie, all sitting in their valleys, all holding their old chambers and their old formations and their warm and cold pools and their layered fossils. All quietly there in the night, with no one walking through them. Perfectly intact, perfectly themselves. The green country to the south, with Buchan and Narracordy and Mount Gambier, and the blue lake above the cave that runs underneath the town. The island country across the strait, with Mole Creek and Hastings. and all their many small entrances and their warm springs and their delicate dolomite chambers. The far west, with Margaret River and its 350 caves under the vineyards and the forest. The north, with Chillago and the black limestone towers and Capricorn and the ancient reef geometry. The tropical north of the Northern Territory, with Kutta Kutta and its walls of stars in the cool dark below the wet season above. And underneath all of them, weaving them together, the basin, the great slow body of water moving westward at a metre or two per year, through the rock under 1/5 of the continent, connecting the caves to the springs, to the lakes, to the deeper chambers, to the unmapped passages that no human survey has yet finished tracing, all of it. One country, one hidden, patient, breathing, connected old country, underneath the country we live in, underneath the bed you are lying in, underneath every footstep you have ever taken in the country above. There, always there, quietly, slowly, without any need to be noticed. The breath is now very long, the body is now very heavy, the mind is now very soft. The names of the places have blurred together into a low, gentle hum. The hum has become the breath has become the night has become the slow, patient pace of the country below, and the country below, very kindly, very gently, in its own enormous, unhurried way, is here to hold the rest of the work for you. So you can let go now. You can let the words go. You can let the picture go. You can let the day go. The country below will hold all of it. It has been holding much larger pictures for much longer. One more of one quiet listener falling asleep on one quiet night is nothing at all. It is welcome, it is held. It is, in the very deepest sense, fine. There is, as the very last of the quiet thoughts before sleep finally arrives, one image worth letting drift through the mind. A small image, a simple image. The image of a single drop of water somewhere deep in the rock. Somewhere inside the connected country we have walked tonight. Falling from a ceiling to a pool. The drop falls slowly because the air it is moving through is still and cool. The drop catches a tiny flicker of the imagined light of an imagined torch as it falls. The drop reaches the pool. The drop joins the pool. The pool is unchanged on any measurable scale by the addition of one more drop. The pool has been here for a long time. It will keep being here for a long time. The drop is now part of the pool. Whatever was in the drop, whatever minerals, whatever tiny grains of carried matter, is now part of the slow chemistry of the pool, which is, in turn, part of the slow chemistry of the whiter water of the system, which is in turn part of the basin, which is in turn part of the connected, hidden old patient country below all the rest of it. The drop has come home. The drop has not been lost. The drop has just become part of something larger than the drop. Sleep, when it arrives, is a little like that drop. The waking mind has been doing its work all day, holding its small shape, doing its small useful things. And then, in the evening, when the work is done, the waking mind can let go of its small shape. The waking mind can drop, slowly, in the still and cool air of the room, towards the larger thing that has been waiting for it. The larger thing is not unknown. The larger thing is the same. Larger thing that all sleeping minds, throughout all the long history of sleeping minds, have dropped into when their day was done. The pool is old. The pool is patient. The pool has been receiving sleeping minds for a very long time, and the pool is, in its own way, gentle about it. The pool does not catch the drop, or judge the drop, or sort the drop. The pool just receives. The drop joins. The drop becomes pool. The pool stays pool. And in the morning, the drop is again a drop somewhere, in some other part of the slow system, with its small shape returned to it, with its small daily work to do again. So you can drop now. You can let the small shape of the waking mind soften and lengthen and slow. You can let it become part of the pool. The pool is here. The pool is in the bed. The pool is in the room. The pool is in the country below the room. The pool is, in a sense, everywhere quiet enough to be a pool. The pool is patient. The pool is fine. The pool can hold the drop. The drop can become pool. The pool can stay pool. The morning, in its own time, will return the drop to the drop. The morning is not in a hurry either. The morning will come when it comes. The night, in the meantime, is long enough and gentle enough and old enough to hold the entire weight of one sleeping listener without any difficulty at all. The country below is patient. The country below is connected. The country below is old. The country below is, more than anything, available. Available to be the foundation for the night. Available to be the floor beneath the floor beneath the floor. Available to be the slow, patient presence underneath the surface of the day. The surface of the room, the surface of the bed, the surface of the sleeping body. There is so much country down there. There are so many chambers in so many parts of the continent, all of them holding their slow, patient air in the dark, all of them connected through passages that no map has finished. There is more than enough country in the connected hidden country below to be the foundation for any single sleep. There is enough country, in fact, to be the foundation for every sleep of every listener for many, many nights to come. With the country left as full and as patient and as connected at the end as it was at the beginning. The country below does not get used up. The country below is not a finite resource for the purposes of being a foundation for rest. The country below is, in that very specific sense, unlimited. So tonight and tomorrow and the night after and the night after that, the same patient foundation is available. The same slow water moves through the same old rock in the same long, unhurried way. The same caves quietly do their breathing in the same connected, unmapped network. The same hidden country below the country we live in stays exactly where it is, holding its own air, doing its own work, available to anyone who happens to need a quiet thing to fall asleep on top of. You happen to need it tonight. The country is happy to be the thing you fall asleep on top of. The country does this every night for many, many listeners, in many, many beds, in many, many rooms, across many, many parts of the surface above it. The country is good at this. The country has been doing this for a long time. The country knows how, so let it hold you. Let the slow, gentle, invisible breathing of the connected, old, hidden, patient country below be the floor your breath rests on. Let the long, slow westward movement of water through the rock at 1 meter or 2 meters a year be the slow rhythm your breath sinks to. Let the gentle drip of mineral water from ceilings to pools in 1,000 quiet chambers across the continent be the soft background sound your mind drifts on. The country is doing all of it for you. You do not have to do any of it. You just have to receive it. And the way to receive it is to let go. The way to receive the country below is to let the day go, and let the room go, and let the bed go, and let the body go. In that slow, gentle order, the way a drop lets go of its small shape on the way to becoming pool. Day gone, room gone, bed gone, body gone, mind gone, breath. The breath stays a little longer. The breath is the last of the small shapes. The breath gets longer and longer until it too becomes part of the slow, patient breath of the country below. And then there is just country. Just the country. Just the connected, old, hidden, patient, breathing country. Doing what it does, in the dark. With one more sleeping listener, resting somewhere on top of it. That is enough. That is all the night requires. That is, in the very deepest sense, complete. And before the last of the words fade out altogether, one last small image, very gentle, to leave the mind on. Imagine the country itself, all of it, the whole connected, hidden, patient, old breathing system. From the limestone honeycomb of the Margaret River cliffs in the far west, through the Great Basin, underneath the centre, through the chambers and the karst networks and the warm springs and the marble corridors and the reef geometry and the walls of stars, all the way out to the Dolomite at Hastings in the south. Imagine all of it as a single body. Imagine it lying there, in the dark, beneath the surface, breathing slowly. Imagine that you, on the bed, are lying on top of one small patch of the surface above that body. Imagine that the body underneath is much larger than the body on top. Imagine that the body underneath has been there much longer than the body on top. Imagine that the body underneath is doing the same slow, patient breathing it has been doing all along. Imagine that the body underneath, in a very simple way, includes you. The body of the country below holds the room. The room holds the bed. The bed holds the body holds the breath. The breath, at the deepest level, is the same air that moves through the unmapped passages somewhere far below. in directions no human survey has finished tracing. The same air, the same slow, gentle movement, the same patient, quiet rhythm. You are not separate from the country below. You are one of the surface ways the country below is currently doing its breathing tonight. Through you, in a very small way, the country below is breathing too. And as you slow down, the country breathes more slowly with you. As your breath gets longer, the country's breath gets longer with you. As your body settles, the country's body settles with you. You are not alone on top of something old. You are part of something old. You always have been. The country below has always been part of who you are, whether you noticed it or not, whether you mapped it or not, whether you knew its name in any language or not. Tonight you simply know it a little more clearly. Tonight the knowledge is a little closer to the surface of the body. Tonight, for one quiet hour at the end of a long day, the slow, patient, connected, hidden, old breathing country below is not something separate from you. It is, in the kindest and quietest and most ordinary sense, you. And so when you let go, you are not letting go of yourself. And then you are letting yourself merge, for the duration of the night, with the larger version of yourself that has been there all along. The larger version that is patient, the larger version that is connected, the larger version that is old, the larger version that does not need anything from anyone tonight, because it has everything it needs already, in the slow, gentle work of being itself. Let yourself become that larger version for the next several hours. Let the surface concerns drop, the way they have been dropping. Let the small shape of the daytime mind dissolve, the way it has been dissolving. Let yourself be country, old country, connected country, patient country. Country that breathes slowly in the dark. Country that does not need to be watched. Country that does not need to be solved. Country that is, by its own simple unfolding presence, enough. The night will continue around you. The country will continue inside you. The breath will continue, slow and gentle, for as long as the night needs. The morning will come when the morning comes. And the small shape of the daytime mind will return. And the small ordinary work of the surface day will begin again. And that will all be fine in its own time. But none of that has to be thought about now. Now is for the country. Now is for the slow. Now is for the deep. Now is for letting the breath be the breath of the connected, hidden, old, patient country below the country, which is, in the only way that finally matters, the same as your own breath. Doing the same slow, gentle work, for the same quiet reason, in the same kind, dark. Good night.